Over the last couple weeks, I have been so busy, especially the last week, in the garden and with the animals, and so much has happened. Our geese have gone broody. We have loaded our incubator with ducks' eggs. The ducks we own are laying every single day. The chickens are keeping us busy, and the garden is doing incredible. We've added a couple of beds. I've expanded the blackberries to the perimeter of the entire property. So last year we only had 8 blackberry plants that produced at maximum capacity and 2 that just produced about a pint combined. So these are the blackberries, and look how many there are already. This one's actually, you see how it's lightening up in color, getting a little bit of tint to it? That means it's about to start turning red. They start off and they swell up really big, and then they'll start turning red and continuing to swell just a little bit before they turn black. And this is kind of how they start. You see this little flower right here, and the flower will pollinate and it will start falling off. So here is what it looks like before it's pollinated. This is afterwards, and look at this blackberry. And then the flower will fall off, and then you'll be left with this, which will slowly swell into the different stages of berries. And you can see right here all different stages of berries, from unopened flowers, open flowers, flower that just fell off, that are turning into berries, big, small berries. I mean, they all produce throughout the season. Now, we primarily grow Arkansas Traveler blackberries. There are a couple of freedom berries sprinkled in. We're looking to add some more heirloom varieties of thornless blackberries. They're upright plants, but even though we put in mushroom compost into our beds, and I also mulch it in, this is generally what it looks like if you don't pull out all the grass after the end of the season, because grass will still get in here. Last year I lost a family member and things just kind of got out of hand. So I'm slowly taking back the entire bed. You can see where in the other areas where it's more heavily mulched because the mulch hasn't broken down as badly, and there's still grass coming in, but it's a lot more manageable. And this, as we finish adding a top dressing of mulch to the garden, I'll pull this out and do the same thing. And then you can see one of the big issues we fight in this area of Texas is always poison ivy, and it hasn't touched any berries. It's a little close to this plant, so I'll just trim that plant back and pull it out, but it tunnels under through its roots, and no matter how many times we pull it out, they'll just keep coming back from the tree line. Unfortunately, it's just something that we deal with a lot of. So it's something you really have to watch out for in the garden, and it grows fast and pops up out of nowhere. But right here, I have my second blackberry plant, and it is pretty tall. It's about 5.5 feet tall. And then look at this. Now, these berries all came from last year's cane, so this is a second year cane right here. The newer canes you can tell the difference from because they look like new growth. They're very green, they're not woody, they're light in color, and let me find a good example of that really quick. So right here, this is a good example of the newer canes. They are not woody, they're really fleshy, they break easily, and here's an older cane which is more woody and looks a lot different. So the canes kind of harden, and if you don't know, a cane is just essentially the blackberry plant. It's where the fruit's produced, and because of the variety that we have, a lot of berries produce on second year canes. So the first year they do all their growth, and the second year they'll produce berries. But on this one, it produces on both first and second year canes. So like this plant, for example, was completely cut down when we moved in, the small tiny house out here. Well, now that it's reestablishing in spring, it's much shorter than the others. It'll grow up to be about 5 foot tall just in this first year, but we'll still get berry production. And that's actually really cool thing about these berries, that if you struggle with pests, you can cut these down completely to the ground. They'll come right back up the next year and still produce fruit. So that's one of my favorite things about them. And when you're first learning how to grow berries, it makes it a lot easier than trying to figure out what canes to cut and not to cut and how old they are, and it can be a lot. So I think that the Arkansas Traveler and the Arkansas Freedom Berry both are excellent for people just learning how to grow your own fruit and berries. And they're very productive. So starting in September of last year, instead of just our 6 family members, which eat a lot of berries, there were 11 of us and 10 full-time. So what that means is that we went through a lot more berries than usual, and still our berries lasted us until January of this year, and it is almost the end of March. I would consider this late March, mid to late March, and they are still producing so well, or they're already producing so well. The only months that they really don't produce is February and August. Those are usually our coldest and our hottest month, and they seem to struggle a little bit, but once it gets back a little warmer or a little cooler, they do really well. Now, we have had issues with flowers dropping during cold weather and sometimes in sudden heat waves, but not so much with the fruit dropping. Usually if the fruit develops well, it won't drop, but we have had it drop one time. And honestly, what happens, and is the most common, is that the berries will just end up like this. They'll get really dried out during a freeze, and that's usually the worst thing that we experience. I've had issue with heat one. So I would say overall, this berry does well in our high temperatures and our wonky winters with the temperature fluctuations. And honestly, even with an occasional fruit drop or them getting basically freeze dried onto the plant, they do so much better than any other berry that I've seen around here, and I'm really grateful for that. So this is just the best plant for us. Now, I've grown strawberries here. I grew some strawberry plants for about 4 years in a row. They did really well, and then last year they just died. And I think they were slowing down in production, but also it wasn't helping that I was pulling plants out so often that I kind of lost track of the plants because I let weeds overtake them, and I probably pulled them out not realizing it, which does happen because for us, the strawberries really thrive in the cooler weather, and then once it gets too hot, they die back until the next year. So if you don't know what you're looking for or you're not paying attention, you can easily destroy your strawberries. I like to grow strawberries underneath my blackberry plants because they both need the same level, similar levels of acidity, and I add some microlife acidifier to them, and they do really well with that. But once I get the beds really well established with mushroom compost and that starts to feed the soil, I don't really need as much microlife. I'll only add it once a year when they really start fruiting, and that microlife is the pink bag, and it actually takes a good 4 months to break down. It is not water soluble, so it depends on the bacteria and the soil to really help break it down, and that bacteria depends on fungi, which the plants also depend on. So all the soil life works together to really break everything down, and that's why I love adding mushroom compost. Now, if you notice, this year I have a lot of this mulch down, and this is actually arborist mulch, and that is when the trees are first wood chipped, and so it'll have leaves and everything else into it, and it breaks down fairly rapidly, which can help retain moisture and feed the soil. You can see how it's in other beds and in the walkway. That will also be in this bed and will be around the blackberries. I just haven't had time to add a new layer of mulch to this bed because we've been so incredibly busy. But in fact, if you look closely, you can see the old mulch, the mushroom compost, is still here. It just really started breaking down, and it feeds the soil and turns into soil itself, which is pretty incredible. You can see fungi forming here in the compost. And the reason that I love using mushroom compost on my blackberries so much is that it was used to grow mushrooms, and so it's been inoculated with that fungi, and that helps in the soil. It enriches the soil and starts creating colonies that will in turn break down nutrients and help feed my plants. And so it's just been really great. And I can step back a bit and you can really see how amazing these blackberries look, how big they are. They go over the fence panel that's there. They are taller than me, and this is after I cut them back during the winter time. So if you don't cut them back, they'll easily get 8 to 10 feet. They're supposed to be a bush variety. They're mostly upright once the canes get older and start to harden, but they still can just take over a space so easily. And that's why I kind of have most of them staked up pretty well. I think these are good for a border along the fence along the outside of your garden, because they will continuously send up runners out of the soil and they will just completely take over a space. I've had blackberries pop up 4 to 6 feet away from the plants, just doing their own thing. And this is kind of what they do, is they send up little shoots like this. And also on top of those shoots, when these plants, the canes hang over, if this cane touches the soil or if it gets buried somehow in the soil, every part of that cane will start developing roots and it'll create another plant, which is really crazy. So that's all why I always warn about the variety of blackberry you use, because some of them have patents against growing them or reproducing, and blackberries just reproduce so easily. You have to really watch out for that. So this is one of my favorite varieties because of how well they grow, and I just absolutely love them so much. I think this is an incredible amount of blackberries, especially for a berry that will continue producing throughout the entire year almost. Like, here's another plant right next to it. So for me, this has been the simplest plant to grow. If you don't know, the area of Texas that I live in is right on the Gulf Coast, and we have gumbo clay soil. It's really heavy clay soil, and during the winter it's really smushy, but during the summer the ground hardens and cracks, and it's really hard for plants to get through with our dry summers. However, these blackberries have a taproot and some other roots that just break through the soil and really thrive in it, and I love that about these plants. So it's easy to add them all over the place, and that's why I'm starting to add them around the border of the entire yard, so that we can have a lot of berry production without taking up all of the space for other plants that could be growing in our garden. Now, I also maximize our space around our blackberries and growth, because these beds are 4 foot wide, and I planted these plants right in the middle of them. So this is a 4 foot wide, 16 foot long bed. So it'll have 4 blackberries in it, give or take about 4 feet apart. 2 on the end of the beds, 2 in the middle, and right in the center. And then around those, you can see how I'm growing all sorts of other plants. These are our lettuce plants. This one is already going to seed, if that tells you how warm it is out here already. And this is a bolt resistant variety that I've grown in the past, and some little lettuce plants down there. So I make pretty good use of my blackberry beds. The space is not wasted. And then over here I have other plants that thrive growing pretty well. So we have our fennel plants, more poison ivy that I need to pull out. This is cilantro, and it's already starting to seed because it mostly grows in the winter time here. So as it produces flowers, that'll turn into coriander. And look, all these new growth down there under this blackberry. And there's all the old, isn't this beautiful? These just grow so well here. They are related to roses, and roses, hibiscus, blackberries, they're all things that grow and just thrive here. You can see how I've utilized the space growing cilantro, which is also coriander. Now that we grow it for the seed, I'm growing fennel and lots of chard. So these beds we have absolutely made the most of. You can see that weeds are starting to come through in some of the areas, so I need to come through. This is where the mulch is broken down, and you can kind of see the difference. All of this chard down here, and it's all under our blackberries. So we really utilize the space. It's really amazing to watch them grow. So with blackberries, I don't really water them, especially in early spring. Now if it gets to be way too hot and I notice fruit production slowing down a lot, I'll water them just because it is hot and dry during the summers. However, they will do well even without water. They will still produce fruit. It's just it won't be as much. So if you live in a dry climate, you might want to consider watering your plants some. And here's another new growth showing. You can see how the old growth that are already producing fruit, and then the new growth isn't yet. It's just really soft and bendy and not wooden. This will shoot up from the plant, and then later this year, probably September, so we'll start producing fruit, and I'll do a follow-up video to kind of show that. So overall, blackberries are one of my favorite plants to grow. The kids come out here and they eat them constantly. They pick them, and we still have gallons upon gallons to store. And with all of us eating them, they still lasted until January. So this year I'm adding many more blackberry plants. I've already added 2 more on a different part of the garden and 3 in this area that are really small plants. And I'm looking forward to seeing them grow into these giant plants over the next few months, and then come September should be producing. So you can see one of the smaller plants and how I trimmed it down, and now it's already grown this much in a short period of time. So when you start blackberries or you order them from a company, they're not particularly big plants, and they're usually dormant, or you can get some that come in little pots. And so they start off about this size, so they're not really big, and you can just plug them into the ground, and by the end of the year they'll be 4 to 5 feet tall and will produce a small crop. And then the next year they'll be so well established, come March they'll already be producing, and they'll just be absolutely thriving like these berries over here. And so if you don't, and you're thinking about growing blackberries, I would highly recommend that you grow some, because you might enjoy it as much as we do. So I hope this video kind of shows you a little bit more about how we grow our blackberries. You can see it's pretty simple. They're just in beds, and that's it. Nothing crazy, nothing special.